Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today we are going to hear from Laila Namdarkhan. She's going to discuss The Whole Woman by Germaine Greer. So welcome, Laila, and over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to say how delighted I am to be here, and I hope wherever you are, you're going to be having a great day. I want to start by saying that initially I was going to be doing something different at the beginning of this week. And then it came to light that the talk that I was going to give, Women in Madness by Chesla, that spot had already been taken and will be recorded in a couple of weeks' time. I wanted to use Chesla because she meant a great deal to me in my work in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I wanted to compare her writings with the works and biographies of Janet Frame, the New Zealand woman who wrote very much about, in 3 volumes, her experience of mental health in the mental health system and the way in which women were treated and perceived and pathologized. Many of you might remember that Janet Frame's books were filmed, made into one film, Angel at My Table, by Campion, one of the very few women directors. So you may be familiar with that, and so I wish that talk well. So I had to think on my feet again, and what I came up with was Germaine Greer. And Germaine is a very controversial radical feminist. She is called a radical feminist in all the sort of write-ups I've read about her as a woman. And she is an enduring sort of person to me because of my age, I think. I feel privileged to have been a part of the second wave, which educated me in so many ways into radical feminism. Into my belief that women can't just get the crumbs off the table, if you like. And finding Germaine many years back ignited that. So what I want to talk through today is the book, which I bought at a very, what I would say, crossroads in my life. I had worked in the NHS for many, many years in high-level management and closed one of the leading mental health hospitals at the time. And I wanted to move into more direct work with women. And so I sought positions, even if they were not anything that I had been doing previously. And I found myself the director of the southeast of England, working in work that was related to women detained in various degrees of high security, where they had been put on a pathway from prison into high secure psychiatric services. So at the time, Women in Madness was being revised after 25 years, and also Germaine Greer was re-looking her work based on the female unit. So it seemed to be a crossroads at my life where I was going to have to be learning. I then joined the Women's Therapy Center for a year's course on working psychodynamically with women, which I have to say was extremely beneficial, but very sad to say that now the Women's Therapy Center in London has had to close due to lack of funding and support. Which I think is another unfortunate thing that's happened to many of the women-centered services that we in the second wave were able to develop and put heart and soul in, actually, to find. I hope maybe one day to do a historical rundown on rape crisis centers and how they were set up across Britain anyway. So moving on. The book is called, as you can see, The Whole Woman. Why did she call it The Whole Woman? Well, it was 30 years has passed since she wrote the female unit, And she said that during that period of time, during that 30 years, she had actually traveled around the world seeking the whole woman, i.e. the woman who stands in her own right without all of the patriarchal paraphernalia invading their existence. And so she felt that she needed to do that. So that's one of the reasons that she wrote this, the update, as she called it. So I'll start from my notes, if you don't mind, because I'm not going to remember all the things I want to talk about. So Germaine Greer is one of the feminists' most controversial icons. I say icon without apology, since for me, as a 76-year-old second wave feminist, I feel as though she has been an inspiration to me since my awakening to a feminist life, culture, both social and academic, and so on. She has her critics, of course, like all icons, both within feminist culture and social and academic and academia, and without in society in general. How far knowledge of Greer and her work are spread globally, I have no idea. I can only speak as a white woman whose life has been spent in the Anglophone country of England and not elsewhere. Germaine Greer first became prominent in the 1970s, a long time ago, when her seminal work, The Female Unit, was published to great acclaim. It can be argued that this is one of the primary sources leading to the second wave feminist movement in the 20th century. The book exposed the underbelly of women's lives as found within patriarchal limitations of life within the nuclear Western family model, uncovering and exposing taboos that had silenced women of all classes. Greer was seen as a radical, as within her polemics she vehemently opposed reform, now known as equality feminism. That one just makes my heart sink, equality feminism, because I just don't see that as happened at all. And asserted that nothing but dismantling the current social structures would liberate women from the change of patriarchy. No matter how many crumbs would fall off the patriarchal table, women would always be subject to compromise, and any rights won would be removed, since the institutions that bind women do not change. And I think we see that now more than ever. I think once again, women are having to take to the road, whether it's the marching, whether it's online, whether it's forming new groups that are resisting certain forms of intrusion into women-only spaces. Sex-based rights are being eroded, and we know that because WDI has made it its business to actually promote women's sex-based rights. And I think, you know, I was very, very proud to be in New York in 2019 to promote the declaration, which is eminently important and eminently places women by feminists back in the heart of the conversation, and rather than pushing us out again. And we are resisting that again. So back to Germaine. The Female Unit spoke in detail about sexual abuse, incest, violence committed against women as a sex class, and was for the first time fully exposed, which galvanized the fledgling second wave women's liberation movement that was spreading across Europe and North America, Canada, and Australia. Obviously, feminism has now spread to lots more countries, and I've always been thrilled to hear about Sheila and her experience of the Korean women in this 21st century. That you know, I mean, it's just wonderful. It really is, because that means a new generation of young women is coming up, and they are looking at radical feminism, and they are seeing, as I did, and many of us here today, that there are answers to be found within that feminist analysis. And we need to do more of that. And I hope that these little sessions are helping new women that are coming in to read these books. And this book is eminently readable. That's one of the things I like about it, because you can dip into the chapters. You don't have to read a long sort of, some of our books are a bit more in depth and a bit more theoretically based, and sometimes a bit hard to access for the first time reader. But this book is eminently readable. You can dip in and out of it from one sort of section and one chapter to another, and learn such a lot, even though it was written in 1999. The other thing about Greer was she was actually a gorgeous looking woman. She really was an icon of her time in that sense. Not to go on about appearance being that important, but she brought a light. When she spoke, the room lit up. I had the pleasure of meeting her about 6 or 7 years ago, and I can tell you that even as she would have been my age at the time, she still could electrify the room, and I love that about her. So let's relate a little bit about Germaine in the early days. Her electric appearance at the New York Town Hall public debate in 1971 with Norman Mailer, Susan Sontag, entitled A Dialogue on Women's Liberation, in which Greer publicly eviscerated Mailer, the arch misogynist, a man who had already almost knifed his first wife to death, and when he asked, well, what is it that women want to be liberated from? Greer said, oh, calm down. Whatever it is they are asking for, honey, it's not you. And she had a supportive uproar from the audience for that remark, putting this man in his place. Such encounters sealed Greer's notoriety as a radical, no-nonsense feminist, willing as a young woman to speak her mind to the rapture of many young feminists working to make sense of their new engagement with the women's liberation movement and its activism that was tremendous. There is no other word for it. I feel part of my energy now still comes from those days. When I think back, that's where I get that energy from, my energy. So let's move on to the whole woman. Let's do a little bit of that now. When the book was published in 1999, as I said earlier, the reviews were rave reviews. She had 5 weeks as the top bestseller at the New York Sunday Times, described as a polemical bomb. I mean, wow, what a description, that this work was a polemical bomb. In her introduction entitled The Recantation, Greer says, this sequel to The Female Eunuch is the book I said I would never write. Her reasoning was that she felt she had no special authority to, 30 years later, to speak on behalf of women who was not of her age. She had supported various feminisms, even though they did not always chime with her own radicalism, on the basis there were aspects of their work that struggled against women's oppression. She was very tolerant. She did not feel the need to get into the fray until feminists of her own generation, particularly ignited by lifestyle feminists, another one of those terminologies that I found very, very strange. How can you be a lifestyle feminist? And then there were the lipstick feminists, I think, as well, and the list can go on, who've been platformed for claiming that women had it all. Yes, they had it all, according to these lifestyle feminists. But her message was, women need to get angry again. That's what women need to do. They need to get angry again. And she said, how dare they ask us what is our beef now, since nothing much had changed, except maybe on the periphery. She worried that 1970s women's liberation movement no longer had the veracity to dismantle social structures that subjugated all women. But a classy form of feminism had emerged, losing sight of the ideal women's liberation. Most gains of the 1990s women experienced were reformist rather than revolution. And here today, as we know, are here today and gone tomorrow, instigated by misogynist backlash. And we did have books, and we still do have polemic around how one has analyzed the backlash and examples of it. Backlash that radicals argue is relentless, not since just the second wave, but the suffragette movement and prior to that Wollstonecraft era. Throughout the book's many chapters, all, as I've said before, easy reads without compromise, Greer warms to her original themes of the female eunuch 30 years ago and has not rounded the edges of her arguments. Her adamant stance that equality feminism will bear little secure fruit for women of all stripes. She continues to posit that, as she was wont to say in a debate at the Oxford Union, that, she said, equality legislation could not give me the right to have broad hips and hairy legs and to be at ease with my woman's body. Your form of liberation, your form of reform doesn't seem to be able to do that for me. 22 years on, bringing us up to date, femininity is still compulsory and has even become an option for men. Amazing, eh? For insight into the trajectory that women's lives are taking at the turn of the millennium have arrived maybe even stronger and more virulent than even her valuable insights could have foretold. But believe me, sisters, in such chapter, she is not far off the mark as she investigates in highly accessible prose the status of women in the whole woman. With rhetoric, her famous humor and wit, and that's another thing I love about Greer. She has a great sense of humor. She's a bit like Sheila, you know. Sheila has lovely humor, which I love very much. Makes you laugh while you're thinking about something serious that is broken with wit and humor. So she wrote the book because she felt that the whole woman could not be seen, even though we were supposed to have had it all. And of course, as we know, that isn't the truth of the matter at all. Just to say that at the end of the session, whenever that is, because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to talk for the full hour, I would be happy to try to answer questions or to respond to any questions that come along. The book begins with what Greer calls the warm-up, where she gives us a flavour of her outspoken synopsis of pre- and post-feminism. In the first, women demanded liberation, and in the other, women settled for equality. The latter, Greer argues, is simply a nightmare. And we can see that now. The nightmare is arrived, where our sex-based rights are being challenged from not just our own sort of country, but from the UN downwards. And it's being spread as if it's, to me, it's like a marmite being spread all over the world. The deconstruction of women, the deconstruction of our rights, the deconstructions of our sex-based rights and single-sex spaces, the rights of lesbians to gather without hindrance, without having to accept LARPing men everywhere, absolutely disgusting. And we're having to fight again for women's rights to assemble, for women's rights to be ourselves and to be able to contribute and change society in a way that will benefit us for once and female children. Following this, the book is divided. So there's 4 categories in the book. Yes, and those 4 categories are body, where she discusses various things to do with women's bodies, and I'll give you a flavor of that. You just hang on while I find it all amongst my stuff. Right, yes. Within the section on the body, she talks about beauty, man-made women, the womb, breasts, food, and the one that I'm going to refer to, which is pantomime dames, man-made mothers, abortion, which is now back on the agenda again, mutilation, and our bodies ourselves. So quite a lot in her first chapter as it's aggregated down. Then she moves to the mind, where she talks about work, which is the one I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on. Can't possibly cover all of these in the time available. Housework, shopping, good old estrogen and testosterone, you know. Soldiers, sorrow and sex. The next one is love, where she talks about mothers, fathers, daughters, which is the one I'm going to tackle a little bit, daughters, sisters, the love of women, being single, and still being wives. The final chapter, with its different sections, is power. She talks there about emasculation, fear, loathing, which is the one I'm going to try and relay to you, masculinity, equality, girl power, and liberation. And all of these are very well researched of the time. So let's move on. So the first one, as I said, I'm going to do the one on pantomime dames, because I think that's one of the sections where Germaine Greer has always stood her ground on the idea that men can change sex and men can become women, men can become lesbians, and anything they choose. No, I mean, they can't. So each chapter also contains quotes from various I'll try and find a page where there's some on it. She puts little boxes in the book like that, and there'll be quotes that relate to that particular chapter. This one here I've got just opened it on itself, and it's called shopping, and she's got somebody saying from a book, Wendy Cope, "For when I asked him if this necklace is all right, he replies, yes, if no means looking at another 3. So there, the woman's asking a question, and he's not really interested in what's going on there at all, probably happy to pay, but not really interested in what she's buying. So take the first one, and then we can move on." Just showing, you know, a side of relationships that are dismissive and not very nice. So let's have a look at pantomime dames, shall we? So here we go. Pantomime dames can be found on page 64 for those of you who might have the book. Here Greer argues, as we do today, that the treatment of gender role distress is not bodily mutilation. Absolutely right, that this level of whatever distress there is should not be about changing the body. But she says, but radical change is needed of gender roles. That's her response to that. She points out that given the stigma attached to women who have refused gender role imposition, like many of us in the past, such women today should not condone such elaborate mutilations of both sexes to adjust to gender conformity. The chapter details various chromosomal conditions along with cultural practices and transsexualism, because when this book was written, transgender was still in the postmodernist stages of queer theory. She is clear that women should not give in to accepting castrated males, and she's very bold about her words, very, very bold about her words there, you know, that we shouldn't give in to accepting castrated males as women, since his intentions, and this is a quote from her, are no more honorable than any female impersonator. His achievement is to gag all those who would call his bluff. And when he forces his way into the few private spaces reserved for women that they can enjoy, he shouts down their objections, bombards the women who will not accept him with threats, hate mail, and he does as rapists have always done. And that's take us over. Take us over, literally. And this she wrote in 1999. And as we can see in the 22 odd years that have followed, that's only become a massive problem for us, a real massive problem. Definitely food for thought here from 1999. So I'd like to move on now to the section where I want to actually read the first part of it to you on work, because I think it's always good to be reminded of some of the lovely way in which Germaine Greer writes her ideas and her history. So she describes women in this section and throughout the book in many ways, that women are the labouring sex. And I think all of us here could not really argue with that. So I want to read to you sort of like a half a page of this, because I found it quite interesting. As women do all the work in human reproduction, so they always done most of the work required for human survival. While the male hunter-gatherer strolled along, burdened with no more than his spear and throwing stick, his female mate trudged along after him, carrying their infant, their shelter, their food supplies, and her digging stick. She collected firewood and carried water. She prepared their food. The universal division of labor between the sexes was, in fact, the apportioning of daily drudgery to the female, so that the male could indulge his appetite for sports, play, dreaming, ritual, religion, and artistic expression. When beasts were domesticated, men drove them. If the beast died, then the woman pulled the plough and the man directed her. Even today, in many agricultural households, the valuable beasts are treated with more consideration than the replaceable woman. The heaviness of work has never been a reason for women not doing it. And yet, last week, you remember we were told about opening the door for women because they're so delicate and we need help. But basically, that's not the case, is it? We don't need help. We don't need that. and I just saw a quick thing on there that I was going to mention. When I go shopping, I mean, who are the people carrying 6 bloody bags of shopping? It's us. It's we who shop, we who get it all in, we who gather it and lug it home, even if it's chucked in the back of a car. But I see many women walking towards the bus stop with bags and bags of stuff because they have no transport other than public transport. So the heaviest of work has never been a reason for women not doing it. Rather, women were not admitted to jobs that required brain power or management skills, even when the only thing being managed was a donkey. In some parts of the world, you may still see the male peasant riding his donkey as his wife walked alongside. I have actually seen that. In 2012, I went to Palestine and I actually saw that happening. In the rich world, the equivalent is the husband who drives a car with a wife, either sitting next to him or who walks to catch the bus. I worked with a woman when I was working in the NHS who's always had to catch the bus to wherever she was going because The husband did not want the inconvenience of taking the car out of the garage just to take her shopping. Unbelievable. All over the world, women do the heavy, mindless, repetitive labor. Women gather scarce firewood over many miles and carry it home on their backs or on their heads. Water is heavy. I mean, I've carried a pail of water from my rain butt round my garden, so believe me, that's heavy stuff. But men, they won't carry it. And as soon as a source of energy is found that make work lighter, men take it over. When cultivation is done with the mattocks, that is the bullocks, and hoes, women do it. But when a tractor comes along, oh, guess who drives it? Men drive it. It's like the men who took the wheelbarrows last week when I was helping out in our park. And they said to me, shall I push that for you? No, bugger off. When the UN project made bicycles available to women traders in Asia, men took them for their own use, and their wives walked to the market as they had always done, carrying their heavy produce on their heads. And I guess that's why at some point the UN started giving aid directly to women's organizations, so that it did actually benefit women. And she has a nice little box quote at the end of that, a nice little box quote from Joseph H. Pleck. Who the hell that is, I don't know, sociologist. All scholars agree that even in studies suggesting that husbands of employed wives do statistically more housework, the increase is small in absolute magnitude, and employed wives continue to do the bulk of family work. So there we have it. So work, where did I get? Oh, right, oh yeah. So just to carry on with that one a little bit, during the course of this chapter, Greer quotes some 1995 stats that revealed that more men than women complain to the Equal Opportunity Commission about their status at work than women. And she argues the reason for that is because women just don't have time to complain. They're too busy trying to deal with the double burden of home and work and have no time. She finds the catchphrase of the 1995, "the future is female," rather hollow, since the vast majority of money, and I guess even today, that women earn will not be spent on herself or recreation. And one of the 7 demands of the second wave feminist movement was, as some of us know, free nursery placements. And here Greer reports the continuing failure of state-financed nurseries, even under a Labour government. The voucher scheme only paid a fraction of the cost and could be anything up to £3,000 a year in 1996. And when I looked up the stats for today, it's gone up to 7,250 for a similar service. A massive hike for families' budget, however the family is constituted. In conclusion, Greer returns to reiterate that for men, work is real, it's a reality. But work for women is vicarious leisure. Part-time, today we can say matters have improved? I'll leave that for you all to draw your own conclusions, because I've been retired for what, 17 years now. So, but I would say, in conclusion of this chapter, women are now working longer as retirement age has been raised from 60 in this country to 67, and all in the name of equality. You see how equality feminism really does us no favors at all. Right. So now, don't know how I'm doing for time. Okay, we've got time. And maybe some time for a bit of controversy at the end. I want to turn now to the chapter on love, where she devotes a chapter to daughters, but it wasn't quite what I expected. Having got daughters and granddaughters, I had a different idea about that. It tells you how long since I read the book. So I was happy to reread this. She says that Greer starts by relating how the fabric of patriarchy began to crack as a result of second wave, or as she calls it, women's insurrection of all kinds. I think that's a magnificent expression. I think we're seeing that now, women's insurrections of all kinds, and forces that are gathering against us trying to prevent that insurrection. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And that revealed the sexual abuse of children. Notable US feminists like Louise Armstrong, who defined the true nature of incest as a method of fathers, brothers to enforce lifelong submission to men. And of course, other members of family, friends working in rape, crisis, and incest. There was virtually no men within the parameters of family and friends that there was no abuse was going on to the female children. However, no sooner had the taboo been broken than counterclaims were made that women were also abusers. And whataboutery has always been a response to feminists exposing men's crimes against us, much like today on Twitter from the MRAs, incels, and trans activists, and even average people who have not really given feminist analysis of incest and child abuse any deep thought. Greer tells us that 1/3 of all calls by women made to the rape crisis and incest line in 1995 was to talk about incest and sexual abuse as girls. So at that time, 1/3. And she quotes, and then she gives us this awful quote, which kind of sums up the attitude of some men towards young girls. And this quote is in her little box, again, from the well-known actor Jeremy Irons. Wasn't he the one who played the part in Lolita? I can't remember who the protagonist abusing male was in that film. Somebody might be able to tell me. And the quote is, "Girls practice on dads. We are supposed to do, what are we supposed to do with girls? Slap them in the face if they give us that look?" Awful, what an awful quote. She describes how daughters are treated by fathers in reality and literature, how the sexualization of girls in fashion has become a huge industry, with its images everywhere of girls being portrayed as mini versions of young adult women. Greer has no answer to the plight of girls in this enforced Lolita culture. And since writing her book, I would argue that the situation for girls resisting puberty has become an emergency situation, a crisis, with massive increase in UK girls wanting to become boys. And wanting to become boys, when we heard the news that the Tavistock Clinic was going to be closed early next year following the Cass report, it came to light that after 18 years of providing this service, not once had anyone taken the time to investigate why the increase exponentially of girls coming to the clinic claiming that they were boys was happening. 400 to 500% increase over 18 years. And no one did any research to understand why that was happening, what was going on. And it's part of the continuation, part of the plight of girls and their distress at being young teens, going through puberty, having to run the gauntlet of porn, which is so prevalent in schools, of other things that are distressing. We had the phase of self-harm, and certainly in my work, in the last part of my career with marginalized young women, the level of abuse, the level they had experienced within their family situations or within care homes was absolutely off the scale, and their self-harming was absolutely horrific. And sometimes in their distress, when I would meet with them, they would pull up their clothes and show me deep, deep wounds across their abdomens. And one cannot respond to that with horror. One has to respond to that with sensitivity. But those things, when you see them, remind you. That was never condoned. Those kind of self-harming behaviors, the cutting, the swallowing of poison, swallowing of batteries, the swallowing drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of these coping strategies that girls had adopted, basically did not receive affirmation. And that's what I find so startling for young women, daughters. They're all our daughters, whether we've had girls or not. They are all our daughters. That now, the breast removal, the testosterone, the puberty blockers are all part of a pathway to affirmation, affirming what I consider an extreme form of self-harming that girls are practicing and being given support for, not only from the loud voices that we hear outside from the trans movement, but from qualified medics, qualified psychologists in these sorts of matters. But I'm not sure whether I'm optimistic. I leave that to you about optimism. But I find that whole business going on now very distressing, especially when a surgeon stands next to a 15 or 16-year-old girl that she has these marks across her chest as a kind of badge of honor that both her breasts have been amputated to make her look more masculine, to give her that masculine look. And of course, we now know, all of us, that detransitioners are increasing more and more and more. So she was right to put that in there. They're our daughters, and that's why we fight for them. They're still ours. The final category, entitled Power. I have chosen the chapter on loathing. That's page 208 in her wonderful flick through, looking for the whole woman. I would argue that this chapter is possibly one of the most controversial in the book, as it revisits her claim in the female eunuch that I've often quoted myself, and I've heard many of the women I know at WDI and at meetings and other venues and other lovely social gatherings, which I value tremendously, which says women have very little idea about how much men just hate them. She follows that by giving us some illustrations of how that deeply has skewed the psyche of women in their relationships with men. She relates the case of a woman in America called Enid Golightly, and in 1976, her husband inflicted massive injuries on her, attacked her with a view to killing her. However, she survived, suffering brain damage. However, he was arrested, he was prosecuted, he was taken to court, and all the evidence from the police, from everywhere, forensic, the lot, pointed to him as the perpetrator and that he was guilty. However, she stood by him She sat in court supporting him. She denied he caused her harm and was bereft when he was found guilty and sent to prison. The bishop, because the husband was a vicar, oh, lovely, yes, nice vicar. The bishop was reported to have said, "The church deeply regrets this has happened to one of our clergy." Well, the wife was not the clergy, so the empathy was with the perpetrator, and not a word about Enid and her condition and her ability to survive such a vile and violent attack. But she still believed that her husband did not mean to harm her. I mean, there's a deep psyche there. This chapter is fraught with examples to substantiate Greer's claims. And anyone who has the book, able to read that obviously for themselves in more detail. And another quote in one of the little boxes is from a young women's magazine called Shout. I don't know if it's still being published. And the young woman is saying, well, sometimes boys say really nasty things to us about the way we look and about the way we talk, or even the way we act. But believe it or not, it could just be their way of telling us that they like us. See? And here we understand how young girls have been socialized to see male abuse and entitlement as liking them. No elements in some young women today who can determine how dangerous some types of men or all men are. Today, this would be dismissed as banter. And no doubt boys sex pesting has been reported last year by thousands of girls on social media is seen as a way of telling a girl he likes her. So if I get sex pestered, then I must be liked. No, because girls were complaining about this. So this is another myth. This is another lie that is perpetrated throughout the education system, that girls like these attentions, that they want boys to show them attention. And it doesn't matter what. Greer is emphatic that we have to understand now is that loathing has its own pleasure. And they are addictive, these pleasures. Brutal men can feed their habit for many years. And she adds, it's an unlucky man who gets any punishment when such viciousness and nastiness happens. This chapter brings into stark reality today's current situation within the gender identity developments, that, as we know, at the heart of it is just the loss of women's sex-based rights, but the loathing and the mocking of women and what it is to be female today. Yet still we are resisting these things. We are resisting our erasure. All the way through Greer's very career in radical feminism, there remains constant truths, two constant truths, basically, I think. And they are equality feminism. Equality feminism does not benefit or liberate women. And men's loathing of women is a constant fact that most women do not want to contemplate. Which reminds me of Dworkin's quote as well, that to understand porn and what it does to women, they need to look at it. They need to see for themselves how the women, the body of women, the mind of women, the very being of women is eviscerated and denigrated and mocked and humiliated. And I think that for many women, that would be a bridge too far. it's too tough to contemplate. I think many women realize these things, but it's, you know, pushed down into the subconscious. So in a way, the book, as I said earlier, is very readable. There's all these little chapters and vignettes on the way. It's a book you can pick up and put down. You can travel with it and learn as something new. Even though it was written in 1999, I would argue it's a very valuable addition to radical feminist thinking. I want to turn now to a more recent thing in closing. Because in 2018, Germaine Greer caught a controversy over some interviews that she gave on the subject of rape. And for many feminists were affronted by her analysis and her current thinking that had obviously moved on from the early days and the middle days and up to the 1990s when she wrote The Whole Woman. Matters had changed. Feminists have done a great deal of work in this country and in America, Australia, and across the world in many respects about the laws relating to rape and so on, and increase in sentences and so on. But at the same time, what we also noted as women, and even the Office for National Statistics in this country can tell us the same, that although the complaints of rape have rocketed over those years, the actual prosecution rate has lowered tremendously to almost zilch. And even when the men get to court and women stand for months in the box being questioned by all sorts of people about all sorts of matters relating to her assault and her experience, often the rapist walks free because the word non-consensual and consensual sex now are intertwined. I think Greer's rejection of the process of prosecuting rape was much more located in the fact that so few women were getting justice, not that she was making light of the experience of rape. And my understanding is that as radical feminists, sometimes we have to think outside the box. We have to think in a different direction about how we can combat the fact that more girls are complaining about being raped, but there are less and less and less prosecutions in this country, and I'd say elsewhere, because the Crown Prosecution Service know for a fact that evidence in these relationship issues are very murky and therefore are very loath to prosecute. So rapists are walking around free. And our argument is better to take them to court, find them guilty because they had non-consensual sex with someone, and then maybe tattoo them or make them do hours and hours and hours of work in the community, because she said that way, at least they would get prosecuted rather than getting away with it as they are now. I know that's controversial. It was at the time. She was castigated for it. But she did say, and I agree, since that happened to me, that that is not who I am, and that is not who she was, and that's not who we are, despite how we dealt with it, despite the trauma. And I have to say that consciousness raising was one of the ways that many women dealt with that situation of rape and sexual assault and incest. I was very fortunate to be part of a consciousness raising group when we were campaigning against Greenham, and it was amazing. There was 20 of us in this group, support group for Greenham, and as as the group progressed, it came to light that every single one of those 20 women had experienced some level of sexual intimidation and abuse. And to talk about it in that supportive way created a great environment of healing. And that's when we went on to constitute the rape crisis. So it's not, I don't think, that of course you may all have your own opinions about how you interpreted that, because there was a big thing about it at the time. But if we call ourselves radical feminists, we have to be controversial. Otherwise, what are we? And so I would like to say that it's been a pleasure to talk to you this morning. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it's given you food for thought and maybe to read the book, because it's a great book to read, and I've had that on my shelf since 1999 when I first went out and bought it. It was wonderful, wonderful. So I don't know, Joe, do you want to come in and any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Laila. That was really brilliant. And I'll send you the chat so you can see all the really interesting comments. One comment I saw, which I thought was interesting, it's from Janie. She said, I love Germaine from when we read her female eunuch in women's history. Every time I saw her, her hair was wild and unkempt. A great example to us all to stop being neat and manageable. So that's really nice. And there's another point from Sheila Jeffries. It's the most radical of her books, this The Whole Woman, definitely, and I really liked it at the time. I was not keen on the female eunuch, too much of its time, sexual revolution and so on. And also Sheila says that Germaine was okay with incest at the time, so that's a little bit sort of similar to her having what she said about rape, that is sort of controversial. And then I'll just add that I saw Germaine Greer's refutation. So there's a quote, there's a thing on the internet, some man saying, Germaine Greer, how can you say that rape's not that bad when you speak for feminists? And Germaine Greer said, I'm not speaking for feminists, I'm speaking for myself. And I think she might have even said, I'm not a feminist. But I thought that adds to your point, Laila, that we need to be able to think outside the box, and that some of what Germaine Greer's written and said would not be thought to be radical feminist or... No. And no. She gave herself the freedom. I mean, she's still alive, so she's giving herself the freedom to think really, really creatively, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, I'd just like to add that I read in doing a little bit of research. I didn't do a lot at that time, but that Germaine has sold up her home here. We know that she was gone back to Australia, I believe. And she sold up there. I guess she's sorted the forest out, but she's actually admitted herself to an elderly care unit. Actually, in the last year or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and that kind of thinking, but I guess it's Germaine again taking control of her own life and making those decisions for herself, that she has reached a point where she just probably wants to be peace and quiet, something we all long for sometimes, but because she would be, 83 now? She's 83 or 84.
Yeah, what a wonderful there was Laila, there's a really nice thing in the chat that you'll see later, is that somebody, I don't know if it's to do with her being in the care home now, but somebody was saying that he was visiting, this is a report in some press, there was a guy visiting a care home, and there was a quiz, a sort of bingo type quiz, or and one woman was answering all the questions and got them all right. So he went over to the woman and said, "Excuse me, could you just stop answering everything correctly and give the others a chance?" And it turns out it was Germaine Greer, Professor Germaine Greer. The guy said, so, oh, this Janie is saying that she's living with her brother. So that's really nice. That's
right.
because she got annoyed being in the care home.
Yeah, I think maybe that was during COVID for some reason. I don't know. I just read that little snippet because I always think about her. I don't know. She's one of the feminists, along with the Dworkin and others that were prominent at the time, that I have newspaper articles from going back to the time, and all those sorts of things, which I keep in my archives in my library, and all of those sorts of things. They're all very precious to me. And sometimes, like now, I've had that whole room with in a turmoil, and so it gave me a chance to get it all out and go through it and just enjoy again,
Yeah.
and feel invigorated by it. That these times can come again. They've been before, they can come again. And I do believe that we have to keep our spirits up in the darkest hours. And these may be the darkest hours, but we can come through them. We will.
Brilliant.
We will.
Brilliant. Laila, thank you so much. We've come to the end of the time, and everybody's really enjoyed this session today. It was a real pleasure, and we'll look forward to having you on again on another book, sort of towards the end of the year or in next year. Okay, have a nice rest of your day, and everybody else, lovely to see you all, and bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.